Welcome to Showstudio. We are here to talk about the Raf Simons show, which took place last night in New York. Obviously, much to discuss whenever it's a Raf Simons show, because Raf is one of those designers that sort of very much seems to set the pace for fashion, and whatever he does, others look to and follow. He does these amazing collaborations. I mean, increasingly, each of his shows sort of is his way of showcasing a new obsession or someone he's worked with for a very long time. He's a very modern way of designing. He's also doing some very interesting stuff at the moment, I think, in terms of really looking back at his own archive, which obviously increasingly with this furor around collecting fashion, there's such a sort of cult thing around collecting old Raf or old Helmut Lang, what have you. And obviously he's also in at Calvin Klein. So very topical, interesting designer. I've got some very topical, interesting men with me as well. Flirting, aren't I? To help me unpick the collection. So before we dive into our discussions, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Stavros.
I am Stavros Karelis, and I'm the buying director of Machine A.
I'm Andrew Davis, and I'm a stylist.
I'm Patrick Grant, and I'm the creative director of eTorts.
So, tell me, why is there such a cult around Raf Simons as a designer? Andrew, you're someone who owns a lot of Raf Simons. What is it about him that inspires not only sort of interest from the fashion pack, but also this sort of collecting mentality where people are so obsessed with buying pieces, having them, keeping them for a very long time?
I think it's to do with there's a lot of graphics on the early stuff that's very collectible. Those kind of nerdatrons that are into Peter Saville and into art direction, I think. You buy a piece of clothing with something like that on. I think it means so much to people, doesn't it? It's ridiculous.
Well, because he treats his collections a bit like these sort of like mini limited edition capsules rather than actually like a sort of a constant collection. You think of like the Sterling Ruby one, Maplethorpe one. It's almost like you're buying a precious object rather than, which I think is a very clever way of working. And he's one of the only designers that I can think in a high fashion context who uses that model so consistent. It's a bit like the Supreme model of like doing these collaborations where everyone rushes to buy them and it's a limited edition. What's your take on it, Patrick? You're smiling cynically.
No, I'm not. I think it's sort of simpler than that. He's actually very good. He's one of the few designers that is genuinely sort of original.
Yeah.
He brings all sorts of ideas together. He's not afraid to do whatever he feels is in his mind, and that's sort of quite counter to sort of perceived wisdom, which is you kind of find a voice and you find an audience and you sort of have to kind of stick. Everyone, I remember having a conversation about Craig Green a couple of years ago, and everybody saying, oh, well, still, people loved it, and then they said, well, now it's become a bit formulaic, and other people say, well, of course it is, because that's his voice, and he's sort of found it, and people love it, and it takes people a long time to adopt it. Sure. But what Raf has done is generate, he's got fans who love him for the fact that he's, he will pluck things from anywhere. Yeah. And, the Maplethorpe stuff, as you say, they feel like works of art. And it's interesting that his background is not in fashion. It is in, design of product and furniture. And it feels like that. His pieces feel architectural. They feel like, like pieces of sculpture often. And, and there's always great theatre. And it just feels new and original. And, and there are very, very few designers that feel genuinely original. I mean, there's lots of people doing stuff that looks interesting visually, but a lot of it, you'll look at a collection. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but you'll go, oh, okay, that's that thing that I've seen from there. Yeah. Or, I've got that hat, that's a 1920s US Navy thing, and somebody's just co-opted it. It looks like a bucket with a thing, and you're like, yeah, but I've seen that. It's just a total copy. Whereas there's almost nothing that you see from Raf that ever feels
too expected.
Too. Even if he does borrow things, he actually designs on them, and that's really rare, and people love it because there aren't that many genuinely original designers.
And there's so much cynicism, I think, that surrounds kind of the crux of what he does, which is these hookups with different individuals or artists or what have you. And I think increasingly there is, you just have to look at sort of backlash sounds like an intense word, but it felt like that around the Louis Vuitton Supreme thing, as people see these collaborations so cynically, and I think people often think that fashion designers, when they collaborate with an artist, that they're sort of devaluing it somehow. And he's always sort of sat up outside of that. Like, people have never seemed to have taken offence.
Completely, I think you're absolutely right in that point, because to me what makes him so special as a designer. First of all, you know, I consider him the best menswear designer, so I can openly say that because
all the
I
other
really
designers you
no,
so
but I think that there are a lot of great designers out there, and menswear designers. But what I think about Raf Simons is about longevity, how long he's doing that for. You know, like we're talking about that he's delivering collections since 1995. So you know, it's something that you cannot like put aside and say, oh, you know, he's doing it for the last 5-10 years. He's doing that for such a long time. And number two, I think that every time that he did a collaboration, he respected so much the person that he collaborated with. I mean, when he did the Sterling Ruby collaboration, they were together on the catwalk taking, you know, going around. I mean, if you see with Mapplethorpe, also, you know that the main feature in that collection, in that collection was the images. He didn't go like to take this over.
The clothes were almost used to frame them, like in your piece
I mean,
you're
like,
wearing, which
you
is
can
very
see that,
interesting.
you know, the main, he pays his respect and he pays his tribute to these artists. And I think it's the same situation with Peter Saville, for example, that he collaborated with. It's not someone that he's just referencing other people. You know, he's someone that take that into serious consideration and respect their work, and they want to showcase him in the best possible way.
And it's interesting the Peter hookup, because I actually think the way Raf works is relatively similar to how Peter works, because Peter built his career in some way off appropriating a very, very famous, beautiful, iconic painting, and then using it, displacing it, and into the context of an album cover. And it's kind of, I see a similarity there in sort of the way they approach the power of images and visuals and placing them in different contexts. And as you say, the relationship with Peter Saville is very interesting between Raf, because it's not a new relationship. As you said, like they did a hookup collaboration in 2003. It's Fall Winter. I should know this because I had it in my exhibition and I've forgotten the date. I knew it's 2003, but I always think it's spring, summer, but it's not. So for that collection, they had, Brett, can you get up the picture of that collection? So it's, Raf had full reign to the Peter Saville archive and created those amazing parkas, which now sell for like £20,000. And then Raf got Peter to redesign the Calvin Klein logo when he went to Calvin Klein. So this is like an interesting long collaboration that has informed lots of his practice. And that's what I find really interesting about this collection, is that it feels so current and new again because of this obsession that everyone in fashion has with graphics currently. But actually this is like a really long-standing interest. You have some of those parkas, don't you?
Yep, 2 outside ones.
You're like, that's my pension.
There you go.
That's my pension.
Loads of young kids who spend all their money on fashion will be feeling really vindicated now. They'll be like, see, I can make my fortune from... But I think it is interesting, these like long-term... I mean, what was it about that collection that appealed to you? Like, why do you think... Like, because Peter Saville is so referenced in fashion.
From Manchester, so I kind of lived that life almost, you know what I mean? It was like my teenage years, the graphics that I was obsessed with as a teenager. So to see it on a coat, see it on a coat in a sale in LA, in Maxfield, was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, perfect.
200 quid for each jacket.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you've done well for yourself, haven't
Stock
you?
market, you know?
I think it is stock market.
It is stock market.
But it's interesting you use the word teenagehood, and I think that's what's really interesting about Raf as a designer. You know, he's not from the north of England, and what it is about someone, you know, he's also did that
I think
collection.
as a teenager, that music influence.
That music,
It is a music
exactly.
influence.
Yeah, but it feels like the consistent thing in his work is it's about teenagehood, but it's also about the things that you love when you are a teenager. So, you know, he's also referenced someone like Mark Leckey, whose work also looks at sort of like these pivotal moments of youth and the like euphoric highs you get from sort of clubbing and being in a group as a young person. And that's also interesting how someone of Raf's age, you know, he's a young man, but he's no spring chicken. Like, he's still doing these collections about youth that don't feel awkward in any way,
No.
you know, and it doesn't, yeah, and I think that's interesting.
It's very current, and I think that, I mean, in our store, for example, you know, lots of times what I realize is that we have very serious collectors that they're getting like in contact with us, and they won't like to get the pieces because they are collector's item pieces. It's very funny that you mentioned Mark Leckey, because we had someone that contacted us and said, I want, you know, these codes, for example, because this is what it is about. And, you know, the same we had with Mapplethorpe, and of course with Sterling Ruby, that went obviously crazy.
So they were a Mark Leckey collector that wanted to buy pieces. That's really interesting.
And this is very interesting because most of the times the art collectors, you know, kind of, you know, dismiss
They're
fashion
quite snooty,
side. You know, they don't appreciate fashion in that sense. But I think this is exactly what we said before, is that the appreciation that Raf has to these artists and the way that he presents them, they understand that, you know, there is like a dual relationship there, and it's a very equal one as well. Yeah.
What are you going to say?
I think one of the differences is that it feels very honest. You know, he's not trying to co-opt current youth culture. He's not trying. He's a guy of Andrew and my age, being, this is nostalgia for his own youth. These are the things he loved in his own youth and has continued to love throughout his entire career. He's not a young designer trying to co-opt somebody else's pop culture from 30 years ago, which we see with people ripping off, like, you know, Mark Leckey, you know, what was the film?
Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that gets ripped off, you know, blatantly by tons of people who were not even born when, you know, the subject of that film was, you know, was happening. And I think that's important because he's, you know, and I think that might be the difference between something like, you know, the way people react to Vuitton and Supreme feels like, you know, I don't know, it feels a little bit trying to co-opt. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure that actually whoever it was, and who was responsible for the Supreme? Was it Kim or was it?
It was Kim, and I think that's what's difficult because
Kim's another guy who loves.
And it makes total sense for Kim. Yeah. I think that's the thing. Yeah. Like, there's no cynicism on his part, but I think it's because Louis Vuitton is such a huge brand that it becomes.
Yeah, if he'd done it under his own name, nobody would have blinked.
No.
And it would have felt completely real, but because it's who they are. But I think all of the things that he does feel deeply genuine, and the way he treats them are very reverential. And it's almost like they're almost like little, you know, they're almost like icons. I mean, especially the Mapplethorpe stuff. You know, they were all framed as if they were little icons, and that's you know, and that's lovely. And also, it's done in a beautiful way, and the products themselves.
Really amazing.
Gorgeous. You know, I mean, you're wearing one. You know how beautiful the finish is, and the materials are gorgeous. The execution is amazing. And again, there's a lot of the time that would just be something just slapped on and sort of chucked out, whereas actually those are crafted,
really
beautiful pieces.
But also I think that, you know, I completely agree with all the points, and, you know, if you see it on these, how many years are there? 30 years, you know, that he's doing it. You know, if you see that, you can see how genuine he is actually with all this work. And I think it's kind of also a reminder, especially this season, that, you know, I've done this, you know, and I was there probably the first one, or one of the first ones, you know, to do this collaboration.
I think that's what's really interesting about him referencing himself, particularly at the current moment, because I think the Raf model is just so relevant to how young brands are building themselves and the kind of ways in which they're working. It's like everyone rips him off, so it's almost like why wouldn't you just it's like, well, why wouldn't you then sort of do it your own?
It's everyone, but I don't think that it comes from an insecure place of Raf, you know, like to be able like to prove, oh, I was there first, because everyone knows that he was there first. What he does is that probably, you know, he tries kind of to remaster and kind of like perhaps educate the new generations of people, you know, that they're joining to buy Raf Simons brand, that perhaps, you know, didn't know that this collaboration happened in 2003, for example, because they're like in their 20s, early 20s. So it's kind of, you know, presenting it in such new way as well, because we've seen the collection, and as much as obviously, you know, Peter Saville is there, and you can see Joy Division, you can see the New Order references. It's done in a really modern way, in a very different way from what was happening in 2003.
And I think what's interesting also is like, we talk about his obsession with youth culture, and I have an endless fascination with why designers are so interested in young people. Like, I did a whole exhibition about it, so I won't talk about it for ages because I could be here forever. But I think what's really interesting is with Raf, it feels particularly, it feels like he's also creating versions of like who he wanted to be. And I find that really interesting when it's not just this kind of like oppressive nostalgia for like, you know, wasn't that stuff great? I wish it was still like that now. It feels like he's almost creating these versions of himself or what he wanted, who he wished he could have been, the people he wished he could have met. And I think that's really, when you use fashion in that.
Well, we do. I mean, I'm doing that slightly at the moment with the torts, the clothes that I'm designing for torts, which feel like, they're very much riffed on clothes that I wanted to buy in the 1980s but couldn't afford. I've rummaged around in charity shops and bought sort of facsimiles of them for 50p. But I couldn't afford the ones that I wanted, which were Armani and and Versace and stuff like that. Even like
I love it when
Gucci
designers do that, though. That's why I love, and we did an interview with her recently, but that's actually why I love Anna Sui's work so much, because that's exactly what she's like, making these versions of like what she wants. And I think that's one of the purest things that you can do as a fashion designer, and like there's so much of that missing at the moment, where you look at a collection and it doesn't seem remotely like it's about obsessions or interests or anything like that. And then when you see people being like, I just always wanted to be cool, and like I'm going to make the cool version of myself, I think that's really lovely.
So fashion designers are very uncool people, unpopular, sat in their bedrooms.
But is that joke that everyone in fashion used to be bullied when they were a teenager, and then they finally...
I wasn't.
I know, I actually had quite a nice time at school, but it is like a thing, isn't it? That, you finally get to a point where you can sort of be the version of yourself that you want to be.
But also if you go on his shows, and you have been, I know, and everyone has been here. So this is what is amazing, is about, the music also that he plays and, the way that he presents his shows. And I'm so happy that this show actually, he went back like to the previous ones, that there was no sitting, people were standing. It was kind of like this club reference that he always has very strongly in his collections. And it's kind of like this techno music that he always loves to play. And it's kind of like the experience of always walking in a club, pretty much, when he go like to his previous shows. And I think this is obviously, he's referring also Blade Runner here, but I think the music and everything is very important to him.
And I love the way often they walk and they're so close to you. And the models are like brushing past you, and that's quite amazing when you're at a show, because often fashion shows, you feel like you're, particularly at the moment with this culture of like live streaming and like all of that, you feel almost like you're just a member of the extras cast, and you're wheeled in to look good on a live stream, but it's really not about you or for you. Whereas the intimacy of this is really, really interesting. And it kind of reminds me of like, when I hear journalists who are maybe sort of a decade or a couple of decades older than me, and they talk about like going to McQueen shows or going to like Hussein Chalayan shows, I always feel like I'm never going to have that experience of like photocopying a ticket and trying to sneak it, because it shows just are so corporate in a way, whereas this kind of feels like it's somehow managed to not really be like that.
No.
Just before we look at the show, what does everyone make of the appointment at Calvin Klein and what he's done at Calvin Klein so far? Andrew, what's your take on it?
So I thought that it was an amazing appointment, obviously. I thought it was great for the job. It was great that someone new could come in. I think my concerns were after, because I'd worked with the brand, it's not just about 2 runway shows. The brand is huge. And he was put in charge of children's, fragrance, golf, beauty. It's a big...
golf?
Yeah, it's a massive brand. Kids, homeware. And I thought that he was going to overstretch himself, really. That was the thing that I worried about.
But then it was very interesting when he took his bow at this show that he came out with Peter Mueller, I think that's how you say it, who's been his like right-hand man for a long time. So I think one of the things that's interesting to see him do is also sort of clearly devolve responsibility onto other people. But as you say, it's a mammoth job. Like even the fact that one of the first things he did was the logo, like it's huge, that all those different...
And a brave thing to do, because they had to can, thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of underwear that had the other waistband, because it was already made.
Jesus Christ.
I'm sure TK Maxx will be.
And they
TK Maxx are loving life.
TK Maxx.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't, no.
Did they not?
No, they didn't, yeah.
What do you make of the appointment, Patrick?
Well, I think it's good, because it needed a kick up the arse. It was as stale, I think, as stale can be, and and I think the job of being a creative director in a big business like that, or whatever you call them, chief creative officer, is huge. And I think the difficulty, again, is that you need, so if you're doing all of those things, you need a great person to do kids, and you need a great person to do homewares, and you need a brilliant person to do golf.
Yeah.
And, he hired Luella to do...
Denim.
Was it just denim?
I think it's denim, isn't it?
But, I mean, she's brilliant. And that's, the joy is with a brand as big as Calvin Klein, you hope that they just give him, frankly, the budget and the leeway to bring in a team that actually can fulfill his vision across all this stuff because, I'm sure he isn't obsessing about, the stretch in the golf pants.
Yeah.
But somebody needs to.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it all needs to have the same handwriting. Wherever you touch that brand, it's not good enough just to say, oh, fuck it, it's a licensed golf. I mean, I don't know if it is, but like, fuck it, it's over there, nobody's going to see it. People do see it, and because the world is now a very small place and everything, everybody sees everything. Yeah. Everything needs to be as good as the runway show. Yeah. And and that is a difficult task, and he probably spends huge amounts of time just directing other teams, and that's a real talent.
Yeah.
You've got to. You've got to be pretty good. You've got to be able to, I think you've got to be able to design great product yourself, but also you've got to be able to recognize and nurture great people. Yeah. And actually that is much more difficult than...
Especially as a fashion designer, because that's not often why someone first wants to be a fashion designer. It tends not to be to manage a team.
Especially if he was a nerd that was bullied and spent his time in his bedroom.
We don't necessarily... I feel like we've created a backstory to
apparently thinks that they all are. But I think it's good. I mean, it's always interesting when a big sort of sleepy brand gets.
And he is fundamentally an avant-garde designer. He's not like, you look at some of the early shows. They're not like. It's not.
We're talking about Calvin Klein now, or we're talking about Raf.
Raf, so that's what makes the appointment so interesting as well. Is you think, I think of those kids in the hoodies, like running around runways. You don't particularly think of Middle America buying a perfume. So I think that's what's.
I think that was the point with early Calvin Klein. The reason people bought the perfume and the pants was because. It was androgynous, it was cool, and Studio 54 and all that cool stuff. Everyone, the brand was cool then. Yeah. And then for a long time it just sort of got milked. Yeah. But you've got to, at some point... Milked. Is that how you milk? No, that's kneading bread. I don't know. This. Should I do that next? No, sorry.
You really lowered the tone.
Rewind. But I think there is a temptation for these huge businesses, because I mean, probably 95% of what Calvin Klein sells goes into department stores across America, and it's an enormous business, and there will be massive pressure from the stores to keep doing the same stuff. And I know the same thing happened at Marc Jacobs. There was like huge pressure from people like Neiman's and Nordstrom's to just carry on producing the stuff that they knew sold. And that's hard. You've got to wrench all of that away and start again, and it must be terrifying for people at the top looking at the numbers going, ugh.
Yeah, you're very
much brave with it though, or it will just wither and die.
Yeah, it's like long term versus short term. Short term, that's a viable strategy, just keep producing the same stuff. But long term, you become irrelevant.
And then most of these businesses, I don't know who owns Calvin Klein, but somebody, is it publicly traded? I don't know, but shareholders are going, they're looking at numbers. They're not looking at 10 years from now. They're looking at the next quarter, and that's a big challenge.
That's the constant problem in fashion, though, isn't it? You're itching to say something. What do you?
Yeah, I was thinking about when I'm thinking about Calvin Klein and Raf Simons. First of all, I think to me, the main similarity that I see in those two people is about youth culture. They both were super obsessed, about youth culture. Raf is all about youth, and also Calvin Klein, because when he did these early campaigns, he was talking the language for the young people. He was actually concentrating and focusing on the ad campaigns for the teenage boys and girls in the US. Yeah. So I think this is the main connection point. I think that also Raf has been extremely well trained, if I may say, with all his appointments beforehand. He was before in Dior, and before that he was in Gilles Sanders. So he's
used to working to a brief.
Dior is a big job as well, what he was doing there. So obviously, he was ready for this, and I think that the reason why he wanted to have probably creative control over every aspect of that company would be exactly what he didn't have in Dior. So that's probably it's his creative freedom to do what he likes to do. And he has proven that he's really good at it, because I remember when he left at Dior, the company came out and said, actually, the profits and the growth has gone up after Raf Simons, was appointed there. So I'm guessing that he's the right man for the job, 100%.
There is that little irony though, that when he left Dior, like he gave that interview, I think, with Cathy Horan, and he was like, I want a quieter life, and then he did this.
And then he goes for Calvin Klein.
It's like, really chilled out, babes. But I think I guess also if you're a designer who is as obsessed with youth culture as he is, like as much as we all wax lyrical about Raf and we think it's amazing, it still does not touch a huge amount of people. It remains like a niche brand. Like even after all these years, it's not a massive brand.
Right.
And I think that they've seemed to have quite consciously made that decision to keep it manageable and small. But if you are someone who's so obsessed with why young people like what they like, and also obsessed with pop culture in the way that he is, like you mentioned that the kind of Blade Runner references in this, but also Peter Saville and like New Order and Joy Division, like it's pop, it's massive. I imagine the opportunity to work with someone like Calvin Klein.
It's perfect.
It's perfect because you're actually going to touch people.
It's teenagers, isn't it?
Yeah, and young people can engage with it in a way that probably, fashion young people engage with Raf, but it's not, you're never going to broadly affect youth culture, whereas you actually can someone like Calvin Klein.
It's actually though, some of like the, lots of people, especially recently, have connected with Raf quite a lot, especially like the really young boys. Maybe, there are the sneakers, the trainers, it could be like just t-shirts or hoodies.
And I think shout out to hymns by musicians and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, like he definitely applies to that really, really young audience that is like the Supreme probably audience or the Palace audience, that they want to buy this. But I think that with Calvin Klein, it's a much broader role that he's going like
and you get to have that formative experience. Like I'm sure Raf remembers the first time he heard like Blue Monday or something, and lots of kids remember the first time they buy a fragrance, and often it is a Calvin Klein fragrance, or the first time you get branded underwear and it's Calvin Klein. So I think that's interesting, those like sense of formative moments in your life that a brand can actually have a part in.
And also only for like a few seasons, you saw that he changed like completely what do you think about Calvin Klein right now?
It's not even been a few seasons. I think it feels like it's been ages.
But I mean, like I'm talking between men's and women's problem, but you're right. It's only one season, and it's actually everyone thinks about Calvin Klein now, and they see like only these campaigns. They see like this new approach, these amazing clothes. Also, he's definitely the man for the job.
Doing a good job. Shall we have a look at the collection that he just showed? I have one question to ask first. So a lot of this is obviously a lot of Blade Runner references. So there are these like constant things that come up in fashion and inspire, like you mentioned the Mark Lecky thing where like everyone has done a tribute to Fiorucci Mimi Hardcore, it feels like. Blade Runner is another one. What is it about these things that come along that just like influence everyone? Like there are certain films that are just like fashion film, everyone references them. What is it about Blade Runner?
Lighting is one of the things.
Lighting?
I think The Hunger is a massive fashion film reference, and it's the lighting. And David Bowie and Susan Sarandon. And those kind of iconic images of those people. So it's always like the cast, the lighting, and then also the wardrobe as well is massively important.
Is that, like, as a stylist, do you find that there's references that you constantly come back to?
On everybody's mood board, constantly. You go, oh, great, Blade Runner, that's nice.
It is
Music
funny, these
videos,
things
they love to reference a Blade Runner.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It's like these things that are on every single brief and, every single collection, you almost think, like there was also kind of an irony to Raf's Maplethorpe collection when you think how many fucking collections have been done about Maplethorpe and like the fact that he managed to do it in a new way. And it is a bit like doing a Blade Runner collection. It's like almost like how sort of obvious can you get, but then he manages to twist it. What do we make of the show? Have you all had a chance to have a quick look, and we can look at it now?
Can't see it.
I know, it's quite hard to see.
I can't see a lot of the clothes, but...
Have we got any like little videos of it that we can have a look at later? Okay, perfect.
I mean, I like the feel of it. The feel of it feels right. I mean, it's
very you dashing through London.
That's me. That middle one. I mean, that could have been me yesterday in the downpour. I love a see-through brolly
in the middle.
These are all kind of like firemen.
You've seen it up close.
Because we were like, we are allowed to say that now. Because obviously, we have to see the collection in Paris before the show. So we all have to sign NDAs. It's not just me; it's all the buyers. They're I think personally, because knowing the brand and the different collections is going to be one of probably the most popular collections that is coming out of Raf Simons, because
Really?
oh yeah, it's every single item. I mean, you know that you can, if you see all the, I mean, the looks now have been put together in that way, but if you see just t-shirts or coats separately or even jumpers, first of all, there are like so many different ways, you know, like to wear them, you know, and I think he's played a lot with shapes this season, and it's also a very heavily referenced graphics everywhere, like references, you know, are really, really important this season. But the shapes also, you know, there are like these amazing fireman coats, you know, that we saw in the beginning, you know, with like the high collars and all the straps and metal straps. But then you see like these t-shirts that they're open on the sides and they have like strings that you can attach them. You can, you know, hoodies that are completely cut in between, and you can remove the hoods and you can wear it like as one of shoulder piece, basically. There are a lot of good pieces, and also probably can say that, but you know the lanterns, the Chinese lanterns, are going to be on. You know,
they're going to sell them.
Yeah, they're going to produce them.
Amazing.
So you know these
Will
are
you
going to
save
be.
me one in Machine A, please? Because some of them have got the Peter Saville graphic.
Yeah, but you see like these jumpers, for example, this knitwear that is one of shoulders.
Yeah. It just feels very Raf. Like it feels.
Very Raf.
I think I was thinking about. I've been thinking about a lot of those kids that, you know, like those certain New York kids who've built those massive archives of like Raf and Helmut Lang, and they're now like actually making good money, like lending the pieces out for like people to wear or for shoots or whatever. So there is this like market, and also thinking about things like, you know, that Grailed app where like guys you can resell your clothes, and it's like it's kind of like that hype beast guy who wants to get all this stuff. And I was thinking what's so clever about this is he's almost catering to the enthusiasm for archive past Raf by just kind of making stuff that looks like archive. It's like if you missed it the first time, it's a chance to sort of get it. And I think that's really clever. Like,
I think this is brilliant, because I think that type of business, I mean, it's fine, everyone is allowed to do anything they want, but I think it has become, you know, completely different.
Yeah, it's become its own beast, hasn't it? Like that resale thing of like, and I think it must be strange also as a designer to think, you know, to see your stuff getting flogged for that amount of money on all these random sites and think, I mean, it's probably really great to know that it has this lasting influence and appeal, but also probably quite weird to see that happen. Why does the Peter Saville collaboration feel right again to now? Like, there's a great exhibition on.
Is it your exhibition?
It's not my exhibition. I mean, my exhibition is really fantastic.
It is
Great.
great.
That one again?
Thanks. So yeah, my exhibition opening in November at Somerset House. No, actually, I wasn't talking about that. But there is an exhibition in Manchester at the moment called True Faith, which looks at the influence of Joy Division and New Order. And Peter Saville was very involved in it. It's curated by Matthew Higgs with John Savage, and it looks at the influence that the graphics of Peter Saville have had across art and culture, and there's works by people like Mark Leckey in there, but also there's that Raf Simons collaboration is in there. And it's interesting. I mean, I think some people are quite cynical of stuff like this because it can feel very nostalgic, and I know within Manchester, young people can feel a bit like, God, why are we harping on about something that we did like 20 years ago? But I do think it's interesting that also there are so many young people who are fascinated by this and why it feels relevant to the now. I mean, maybe it just is this obsession with graphics and what have you.
Yeah,
but
weirdly, I'm never bored of seeing that Power, Corruption, Lies cover or, you know, a Hacienda flyer or anything that Peter Saville did. It even now feels fresh because it's so colourful and it's not one-dimensional. It's quite... It's lasted so long, and I think that's the reason.
And also the Hacienda people are, I think also because so many young people in London are growing up in a time where all these clubs are getting closed. So all these young kids who are writing for publications based in London, like Dazed and stuff like that, kind of like idolise the Hacienda in this sense of, you know, this amazing time where you could go and have an amazing night out.
I only went once and someone got shot.
You went what?
I only went
And then it
once.
I
was
also
closed for
really
about-
can't imagine you at the Hacienda. When did you go? Did you
I
go
was
after?
living in Leeds at the time.
Did you go after it had kind of?
No, this
tailed
was
off?
in the 90 or 91, I guess.
Okay. What did you wear?
I can't remember. Maybe
in a
Yoji.
green Parker because that shot
Something too tight and sleeveless.
Oh gosh. Do you know if I was prepared for that visual? That combined with the milking, I don't think we'd be able to have you back on.
He was doing that on a podium.
Yeah, almost certainly.
But it is interesting that because very different thing, but Topshop for their I think it's their unique pre-collection. It was all Hacienda inspired, and Adam, who I've curated my exhibition with, sent me an email about it and was like, "This is so weird. Like, what is this just like there's so much hacienda stuff going, like Virgil Abloh, who I think is super interesting as a designer, who does Off-White, like loads of his stuff also, like he works a lot with Ben Kelly, who designed the hacienda, and I'm like, what is it about it that, like, Virgil is a young man from Chicago, like it, kind of similar to Raf, has no real connection, and it's like, what is it about that is it just the graphics? Is it the music?
I think it's a very special time, Liv.
I think it's...
And you didn't experience it.
It was interesting to me. But they didn't experience it either. Do you know what I mean? It's like referencing something that you would know.
Exactly, and they were like...
But they will have experienced things that felt the same.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm not questioning it, I just find it interesting.
It was also, that's why if you think about it, I mean, 90s have been one of the decades that have been so heavily referenced for everyone.
Yeah.
Maybe they had a really good time, which probably they had, and we had actually, because I was also, you know, in 90s, but then I'm not like that young. In Crete. But then,
wild.
Yeah, being wild by myself, basically, you know, and 2-3 more people, you know, like in a rave club in Crete. But then this is what I think is like, it's the music, you know, it's that they have a good time, and it's all the music references that they have, like.
What I love about this is the fact that it's such ugly proportions, really. It's not the easiest thing to wear.
No.
I think there's a backlash from him and his team about who's wearing it and how they're wearing it, because this is not the easiest thing to stick in a music video or to rip off, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they were saying that about the oversized jumpers too. You remember, like, I mean, when they came out.
But then the oversized jumper, I think that's like such a staple Raf item. Like, I think like earliest collections, those massive kind of varsity jumpers, that they're almost a rehashing of that. But I do, so do you think it's an attempt to distance themselves a bit from the kind of sportswear?
Yeah, and all those people, that have ripped them off, or people that are wearing it that he's not so into, and I think it's very clever. I mean, you know, it's great
Who styles it?
I think it is the team that
It's the team, it's in-house,
It's always the team that he works with, I think,
Yeah.
But I think that the people that are making, it's a very, very valuable point, you know, that it's kind of reminding, it's kind of, you know, reminding to everyone, but also, you know, separate somehow, you know, like in different styles. He always does like these different proportions every season, you know. I mean, he really loves like all these oversized items, but they are made not in the classic typical streetwear type, you know, and sportswear type. It's completely different vibe to it when you want to wear it. But also, you know, it's very funny to me because I was reading something very recently, and you know how everyone says that, oh, Hedy was the one that he created that portion of like the really tight fits, you know. And
well, that's why they don't like each other, isn't it?
Because it was Raf actually, you know, like whether it was like, because Raf was the first one to do it. So I think...
Because when it all kicked off with Cathy Horan, it's because she wrote that it was actually Raf, not Hedy, and it all went crazy.
Yeah. Which I did...
Me with my popcorn.
So...
But I do think what's interesting also about this is like, I mean, we talked about how 80s it is, and I mean, the lighting, I mean, it looks like a film still. It doesn't look like you know, how shit catwalk imagery usually looks. It looks so generic. It always looks the same, whereas this looks very, it looks really art directed, very clever. But I also think it's really different to, I mean, at Calvin Klein, he's playing on that androgyny, you know, lots of like the girls in the full tailoring or the full double denim with the boys. And this feels very removed from that, you know. When you think of the 80s, you don't really think of androgyny. I think of something very...
I think it feels very European, which his collections have felt.
Before.
This feels like I've been here a year now and I'm settled, and this is a new me, a new silhouette.
Are you a fan, Patrick?
I like, I do. I mean, I was obsessed. I really liked his work for Jill Sander. That's much more
your aesthetic,
you know, much simpler. But I mean, a lot of the shapes in here, are clearly, you know, worked. You know, there's a couple of big jackets. You know, there's that lovely front. You know, that sort of the storm flap on the front of the coat you've seen before. That very sort of bell-shaped coat is really nice. You know, I would find this tough. You know, I would find this tough to wear myself. But
give yourself a go. Get an umbrella, put on a hat.
I can see you in a lilac fiction.
But it's lovely, and it does feel completely coherent, even though there's a lot of elements. You know, there's yeah, it sort of, you know, sometimes you see collections that are similar in their sort of awkwardness, that just feel sort of deliberately awkward, whereas this feels sort of like real and nice and you know, and sort of honest, and
they
also,
look like
you know,
grannies to me. I think they're like old women.
Yeah, I know there is an
there's
element of that.
there's like a sort of batty old sort of bag lady look to it, which also I slightly.
There's that otherworldliness to it of like, there's a chilliness to this, and I think chilliness is like really important to Peter Savil's work. Like there's not a warmth to it. It's kind of epic, but at the same time, kind of, there's this like modernism to it that can feel really like, I can never articulate it as well as Michael Bracewell does in that amazing essay about Peter Saville. But I think this collection feels like that. It's like that play between something very warm and those pastel kind of neon-y colours that you think of with Peter, but that also feel very sort of modern and clean. I just think it's very interesting.
That shape on the end, I really, you know, I really think is lovely. But it feels, I don't know, I'm trying to think you know, it sort of feels, there's a touch of sort of the lady in the van about it, in the best possible.
I'm sure that's what he was going for.
But, you know, it feels a little bit, you know, there's a bit, you know, it does feel futuristic in the sense that it's like all hell has broken loose.
Yeah.
And I've got what I've got. I'm a man wearing an oversized coat with a sarong and a scarf, and it's slightly sort of nuclear winter with the, you know, the bits, and it definitely feels very futuristic.
And I love the anonymity of it. You know that feeling when you are walking down the street and you see someone wearing something really amazing and you're like trying to look at them and they're like disappearing down a road. I kind of like that about it, is in the models kind of look like that. And I think it's kind of clever as well how the Peter Saville stuff, I mean, if you looked at this collection just on social media, it would feel like it was just Peter's celebration. But actually, when you look at it, there's lots of other elements to it opposed to that, to just that.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of punky references and, you know,
but all
tartan and big check. I mean,
And he does that. I mean, I should have brought them in with me, which was silly that I didn't. But I found the other day, I've been tidying up my flat, and I found the show notes he did from, I can't remember what season it was, but it was when he did all those big varsity jumpers. And it was just like a list of things he was obsessed with. Yeah. And it was like, and it was amazing. And it was like a teenager writing down what every poster in their room is about. You know, like this band, this
Twin
movie.
Peaks,
Yeah,
like
exactly. All this different stuff. And there were even the names of like 4 of his own collections on that. And I found that really interesting because it kind of suggested to me how he does do his collections as these kind of many different...
The Mulholland Drive, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, references, yeah.
Does look fun, doesn't it?
It's a very, very beautiful collection. I mean, I think that, you know, it's a lot of going on, but if you think about it, you know, he has like this unique element of combine all this together and make it look like really, really beautiful. Well,
because it's about personal obsession, so it's always going to feel vaguely coherent because it is just stuff that he's really into.
And Peter Saville actually rewrote some of the words, and I mean, I have the text if you want like to see it, but you know, like there is like a completely new like text that they have written on them, which is really, really beautiful. Yeah, really, really nice. So
we're very impressed then. Are you going to be buying some of this to add to your archive, Andrew?
Might get a brolly.
You're going to get a brolly? I mean, you can probably get one just...
Get one with a glowing candle, he'll be very happy.
I doubt, are they actually Raf Simons? I think they're probably just brollies that they've purchased. It's like...
they were
where do you
printed,
get a brolly with
Where were they printed?
Yeah, they had like print.
With Peter
I didn't realise all of them were printed. I thought some of them were just the generic clear ones. No, so they're all printed?
They're all printed, I think.
That's quite cool.
And I think there was little badges that lit up and stuff that looked quite interesting.
Oh my God, yeah, the brollies will be really good.
Stav?
That's so stressful because you
we're getting everything, guys.
You always lose your umbrella.
Out.
Imagine if you bought that and then lost it. It'd be awful.
Yeah, you do always.
And then in 20 years' time, it's worth £20,000 and you left it drunk in the block cloakroom. I know what's happened. It's a disaster. So we're excited to see the next Calvin Klein show off the back of this then.
For sure, I think like he did like such an amazing job on the first one. You know, I think like it's really brilliant. I mean, I don't know if you saw the pre-men's that he just did, and also you know it looks like fantastic. I mean, he carries on exploring. I think like his whole type of Americana. obsession, I think, that he has, but in a very smart way. He just moved there, so he was always one of his big dreams. He explored kind of like all the American dream, back from his early collections, back in 1995, and now you see him that he lives there now. Obviously, he moved in New York, so he experienced that in a very, very different way.
Firsthand,
and Calvin Klein is again a very American brand, so I think like he reintroduces things that are very, very familiar to USA, but in his own interpretation. And I think that's what it makes
amazing. That image is brilliant, isn't it?
It
does look like a film still.
It does, the whole thing looks
it does.
But I find it really interesting because there's a bit of that going on this season. So I don't know if any of you guys were there or if you saw the videos of the Com show, which was amazing. The Com, it was like a disco and they played...
what was the film about?
So no, it wasn't based on a film, but all these kids would sort of... So the models at the Com show, they came on and they were like dancing around in these glittery things. It was
Did they have headphones on them?
They weren't wearing headphones. Britt, can you maybe get some pictures up of the Com show? So they're all wearing like these and it kind of had a similar feel to this, and every single picture of it that went on social media, it looked like you were watching a film still. It looked like film stills. And I do think designers are probably getting really bored with just how generic the show has become, but also because even if you do an amazing, so this is what it was like, but if you look at some of the social pictures, because they all came on in groups and they were like dancing around with it. So can you see it? So it looks like film stills. Like whereas that's a catwalk show. And I do think if you're someone that cares so much about how you put your clothing together, you can do the most amazing show in the world, but most of that show is digested via imagery. And if all your imagery looks really generic, so I think it's quite interesting to see designers kind of treat the show like a film. I mean, this was amazing. It's one of the best shows I've ever been to. But the Raf thing kind of reminds me of this. Like, I think, like, partly just because of really obvious things like the palette and those lights and stuff. But it is quite amazing that it's making me like actually excited about Fashion Week again. And for a long time, I felt really like.
That's very true.
Do you know what I mean? It's really you do feel like everything's the same.
This season was a bit, not that exciting, I think. But then,
and you're like, why am I here? I could just watch this online. Like, and I think there's something amazing when you go.
How beautiful these are. I mean, like the brown, like the patent leather also is like so beautiful.
I'm going to try and recreate this look tomorrow if it's raining. I actually think this is very Patrick Rowe. Yeah, trekking around the countryside. I think it's very, I think you need to go and try it all on and report back to us with a series of images.
Okay.
And it's got a
challenge. I'll come when it comes in store.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a challenge actually. A Showstudio one. That would be cool.
That's our challenge.
And it's got lots of like wording. I mean, this is the other thing, because Peter Saville obviously did like all the graphics, but then there are like so many other graphics in the collection that they write replicants on it because it's a reference on the film, and they use the same typography as the film, which I find it very interesting actually. That it's not just we're going to do one collaboration and that will be Peter Saville. They use the other references
And the cleverest thing about it at the moment is like when you look at a brand like Supreme or Palace that is doing so well and is so popular with young people, and it's not a really extravagant price point, it's like high fashion garments have to really like back up why they're worth what they're worth. And I think increasingly a particularly younger consumer is less interested perhaps in sort of make and finish than they are sort of graphics and that kind of thing. So what's really interesting with Raf is I think he's understood that. And he's given a reason why his clothes cost the amount they cost because of this veneer, well, it's not veneer, this sense of it being limited edition and something that you could never get. And I think that's something that maybe other menswear brands are struggling with is to justify their price point when they don't have that sense of cult around them. Whereas with this, you really feel like you're buying a little part of like, it's that myth that high fashion tries to create, like you're buying something that you'll have forever and but with this, people actually do. And it's done in such a simple way, which I think is really clever.
But I think also, it's a great thing to do, I mean, maybe it's against, what like probably someone that has a shop would say, but I always think that it's much better, to invest into one or two pieces in your wardrobe instead of like trying to get like lots of them, but make sure that you connect with the item that you're getting. And I think that this connection is what he's searching and what he likes to see. As I think every designer wants to like to see that. It's not the philosophy, someone is going to buy it because in 5 years' time it's going to worth a lot of money so I can resell it. But, he wants to buy it because he's going to love it and wears it to death, and he's going to have so many stories creating.
I
And
have
memories.
friends who bought the Mapplethorpe stuff and literally actually framed it and put it
Yeah,
on their
yeah,
walls, and I
yeah.
think that's so charming, like that you'd be so excited by something that you want to have it forever.
Wow.
I know, I want to be in that film. Pretty good. Shall we give him a big round of applause for
100%.
producing such an amazing collection?